On a cold January morning in 2023, tragedy struck behind closed doors in Manchester, New Hampshire. A 7-year-old boy was discovered unresponsive on the bathroom floor. His young life cut short far too soon, only months earlier. He had been bursting with energy chatting with friends about his favourite superhero, Iron Man, and filling rooms with the kind of laughter only a child can bring. His death left behind unanswered questions, a grieving community, and a harsh light on the systems meant to protect children. What his father later revealed shocked the nation. What truly happened that winter? This was not only the story of one family, but a symbol of how warning signs can be missed and how fragile the safety net for children can be. I share Javion's story not to sensationalize a loss, but to shine light on the shadows where danger hides in plain sight. Together, we'll trace the missed opportunities, the overlooked signals, and most importantly, the lessons we must carry forward to protect children, because every child deserves to grow up safe, loved, and heard. Be a voice for children, share this story. Your awareness today could save a life tomorrow. Javion Riley was a bright, joyful 7-year-old who found magic in life's simplest pleasures. He loved wearing his Iron Man pajamas, got lost for hours in games on his tablet, and was just beginning a new chapter, moving in with his father after years apart. His dad called him JV, a nickname spoken with pride and tenderness, as if it could mark a fresh start for them both. From the beginning, Javion's world had been shaped by separation. His parents split when he was very young, and custody was granted to his mother. She raised him through his earliest years, while his father was only a sporadic presence. For Javion, she was the steady anchor of his childhood, but stability proved fragile. Child welfare officials later investigated his mother, citing unsafe conditions in the home, with her deemed unfit, at least for the moment. Custody shifted suddenly to his father, Matuda Muhammad. On paper, it seemed like the right solution. One parent steps back, the other steps up. Still, one detail lingers like an unanswered question. The custody transfer was grounded in a DNA test confirming Muhammad's paternity. But why did it take a laboratory result to affirm what love itself should make unquestionable for a child? Moving households is not just about a new address, it's a complete reordering of their world. Experts warn that sudden changes like this can be deeply unsettling. Kids might withdraw, act out, or fall silent, subtle ways of expressing a pain they don't yet have words for. Muhammad, just 24 at the time, was young and struggling to find his own footing. He had once been homeless and admitted he wasn't fully prepared for the responsibilities of raising a child alone. He and Javion lived with Muhammad's mother, who worked exhausting 80-hour weeks to keep their household afloat. A DNA test had confirmed his paternity, giving him legal standing. But biology alone doesn't prepare someone for the complexities of parenthood. How carefully do we evaluate a parent's readiness when custody is transferred under pressure? What support systems exist for someone suddenly thrust into full-time caregiving? These aren't bureaucratic details. They are safety nets meant to protect children before they fall through the cracks. The warning signs began subtly, as they often do. In the days leading up to January 2023, Javon's world had started to shift in troubling ways. School attendance records would later reveal that Muhammad had withdrawn Javion from classes on Thursday and Friday, claiming the boy was unwell. But illness wasn't the real reason. Court documents would later expose a darker truth. The following section discusses sensitive issues involving child mistreatment and family stress. While details have been adapted to avoid graphic description, the themes may still be difficult for some viewers. Muhammad had begun disciplining Javion in ways that crossed the line from correction by his own eventual admission. He had hit the child with an electrical cord and slapped him multiple times over a 5-day period. The supposed infractions, Muhammad believed Javion had lied about taking inappropriate photos, possibly influenced by a 12-year-old uncle. Whether these accusations had any merit became irrelevant in the face of the response they triggered. The pressures inside the household built like steam in a sealed pot. Muhammad was unemployed, relying on his mother's grueling 80-hour work weeks to keep the household afloat. All while suddenly responsible for raising a child he barely knew. On top of that came drinking court testimony would later describe how his alcohol use rose around the holidays Thanksgiving, Christmas, and his birthday in mid-January. Each drink pushed him further from patience and reason, and closer to the edge. This pattern is tragically familiar. Financial strain, alcohol use, and inexperience with parenting combine into a volatile mix, an environment where the smallest spark can ignite disaster. It doesn't excuse what happened to Javion, but it explains how easily a struggling family can slide from stress into crisis. The school absences should have been a warning. When a child suddenly disappears from class without proper documentation. When vague illnesses are cited, but no care is sought. The alarms should sound. Teachers and school staff are often the first line of defense in protecting children. Their role in spotting changes in behavior, sudden fearfulness, or even patterns of bruises is nothing short of life-saving. But for Javion, no one intervened. His absence passed without question. His bruises remained unseen or unnoticed. The electrical cord left its marks, the slaps left their shadows, and the little boy was left without anyone to protect him. Child welfare advocates will tell you that abuse rarely erupts overnight. It escalates. What begins as harsh words becomes a slap. What begins as a slap becomes repeated blows. And when alcohol enters the picture, that escalation can speed up with terrifying force. In Muhammad's case, the holidays, normally a time of joy, became the perfect storm. Family tensions, financial strain, the expectations of gift-giving, and the numbing haze of drink for Javion. The result was catastrophic. By January 2023, the situation in Muhammad's apartment had shifted from troubling to critical. The 5 days of harsh punishment he later admitted to weren't isolated incidents, they were part of a pattern already spiraling out of control.
Joanna gradually realized that Valdez Cruz would kill her and the legal system could not protect her. This despair led her to tragically accept her fate. In a tearful conversation with her sister Melissa, Joanna said that if she died, she wanted to be dressed as she was now for her funeral, not in a suit or an outfit meant for an older person. This statement revealed that she had accepted death as inevitable, but still wanted to be remembered as her true.
Muhammad's own words to investigators reveal the mindset of a man drowning in responsibilities he couldn't manage. He spoke about lies, about discipline, about trying to be a good father, but between the lines, a darker truth emerged. Investigators found Google searches not about healthy parenting strategies or positive discipline, but about treating burns. These were searches made only after harm had already been done. The physical signs of what Javion endured were tragically clear. This is not easy to hear, but it must be remembered so that his suffering is not forgotten. Without going into graphic detail, medical examiners later confirmed evidence of repeated harm injuries that had occurred at different times, some recent and others older. Forensic specialists described this as a pattern of multiple injuries in various stages of healing. A well-known indicator of ongoing abuse that any trained professional would recognize. But no one had the chance. Javion had been withdrawn from school, cut off from teachers, nurses, and even casual community observers who might have noticed the warning signals, whether intentional or not. Keeping him home ensured his suffering remained invisible. Here the system failed again. The Department of Children, Youth and Families, which had removed Javion from his mother's custody, citing unsafe conditions, placed him with his father without meaningful oversight. The assumption seemed to be that biology equaled safety, but family ties are not enough, without monitoring, training, or support. A vulnerable child was left in an unsafe situation that grew more dangerous by the day. Cases like Javion's make the path forward painfully clear. Sudden custody transfers must be accompanied by real safeguards, regular in-person visits by social workers. Not just phone calls, parenting classes for caregivers, thrust into new roles, and substance use screenings when stress and instability are evident. These aren't intrusions. They are protection's lifelines designed to catch children before tragedy strikes. As we reach this point in Javon's story, I need to pause and speak directly to you, the person listening. This case isn't just history, it's a mirror reflecting ongoing failures in communities across America. Right now, in your neighborhood, there may be a child showing the same signs Javion did. A child withdrawn from school with vague explanations. A child with bruises explained away as clumsiness. A child whose spark has dimmed, whose laughter has quieted. Share this story, not for the shock value, but for the awareness it brings. Every person who understands these warning signs becomes part of the safety net that could catch the next child at risk. The following section discusses the events of the morning when Javion's life was lost. Details have been adapted to avoid graphic description, but the themes may still be difficult to hear. The morning of January 2023, when everything changed, began like any other in the Muhammad household. The grandmother had likely already left for one of her long shifts. The apartment was quiet except for the sounds of a 7-year-old boy and his father navigating another day together. But something was different that morning. Maybe it was the accumulation of stress, the effects of alcohol, or simply the tragic culmination of escalating violence. Whatever the trigger, this would be the day when discipline crossed the final, irreversible line. Muhammad would later tell investigators that he had told Javion to take a shower. A simple request that any parent might make. But in the context of the previous 5 days of beatings, in the atmosphere of fear and pain that had been building, this request carried a different weight. Muhammad claimed he threatened to take away Javon's tablet if he didn't comply, a common parental tactic that, in normal circumstances, might be unremarkable. But what happened next was far from normal. The physical evidence found at the scene painted a picture that contradicted Muhammad's initial story at every turn. Water on the kitchen floor, a soaking wet rug, a pot of boiling water on the stove, and Javon, found on that kitchen floor in a state that medical professionals would later describe using clinical terms that I won't repeat here. What matters is that the evidence clearly indicated this was no accident when the 911 call came. The community's response was swift, but also marked by shock. Paramedics saw immediately that the scene didn't match the explanation. Police began noting inconsistencies that would later prove critical. Neighbors, people who had lived steps away from the family, struggled with guilt in hindsight. Could they have seen the signs? Could they have spoken up sooner? This is why community awareness matters. Protecting children doesn't mean distrusting every parent or treating every family with suspicion. It means remembering that abuse often hides behind ordinary appearances, that an overwhelmed young father, a stressed caregiver, can be just as dangerous as the stereotypes we imagine. And it means that our discomfort with getting involved must never outweigh a child's right to be safe. The investigation that followed Javon's death revealed layer upon layer of deception, failure, and missed opportunities. When Muhammad made that 911 call claiming his son had been burned by hot water from the shower and a pot on the stove, he set in motion a process that would ultimately expose not just his own crimes, but the systemic failures that had enabled them. Detective work in child death cases requires a delicate balance of thoroughness and sensitivity. The Manchester Police Department's response that morning began with standard procedure securing the scene, documenting evidence, and beginning preliminary interviews. But as investigators looked closer, Muhammad's story began to unravel like a poorly knitted sweater. The following section includes references to medical findings related to child abuse, while details are moderated to avoid graphic description. Some readers may find the content distressing. The physical evidence told a very different story than Muhammad's words. Water pooled on the kitchen floor, a rug was soaked through, and the pot of boiling water on the stove appeared staged rather than accidental. Most tellingly, medical examiners documented injuries that could not be explained by simple contact with hot water. The clinical findings revealed a combination of severe burns and other trauma inconsistent with Muhammad's account, the examiner noted. Crucially, that there was no evidence Javion had been in a warm shower at all, directly contradicting his father's claim. When Mohammed was brought in for questioning, investigators employed careful techniques designed to protect both the suspect's rights and the integrity of the case. The interview was recorded. The door closed, but not locked, and Mohammed was informed of his rights. These safeguards ensured that any evidence gathered could be used in court, a vital step in making justice possible. Mohammed's behavior in the interview revealed the psychology of a man caught between denial and guilt. He first presented himself as a concerned father asking about his son's condition, requesting hospital contact information. Offering detailed accounts of the morning, he claimed to have searched online for ways to treat burns, suggesting he had tried to help, but investigators quickly noticed the inconsistencies, the subtle cracks in his story. Digital forensics told the truth. His phone showed searches about treating burns, but they came only after the incident, not before. There were no searches about parenting, discipline, or how to handle a struggling child, searches you might expect from a parent in over his head but trying to do right. The trail suggested panic, not preparation. As the evidence mounted, Mohammed's narrative shifted. He admitted to using an electrical cord to strike Javion. He admitted to slapping him. He framed these as discipline for supposed lies about inappropriate photos. Yet, even these admissions could not account for the full extent of the child's injuries. Beyond Mohammed's actions, the investigation exposed the failings of the very systems meant to protect Javion. Where was the follow-up from DCYF after his placement with his father? Why were there no in-person welfare checks? No assessment of Mohammed's capacity to parent? No support for a young man suddenly raising a 7-year-old? Investigators were left asking the questions many of us now ask. Why wasn't there better coordination between agencies? The department that removed Javion from his mother's care appeared to have no meaningful communication with schools, healthcare providers, or other safety nets. This siloed approach created the very gaps through which children like Javion fall and sometimes never return. The legal proceedings that followed Javion's death represented more than the prosecution of one man. They became an indictment of systemic failure and a call for reform. When Matuda Mohammed stood before the court in May 2023, he faced the weight of evidence investigators had meticulously gathered. The prosecution's case was built on irrefutable facts, the medical examiner's findings, Mohammed's shifting and contradictory statements, and the digital trail that revealed panic rather than parenting. Presented with clinical precision, the evidence dismantled the story of an accident. The burns, the fracture, the repeated signs of harm all painted a picture that could not be explained away. Observers in the courtroom were struck not only by the brutality of the violence, but by the silence of the systems that should have intervened. Prosecutors highlighted how Mohammed had withdrawn Javion from school, cutting him off from one of the most important safeguards for vulnerable children. They underscored the absence of oversight from Child Protective Services. Despite the recent and abrupt custody transfer, they reminded the court that no one, not relatives, not neighbors, not professionals had stepped in despite what must have been visible signs of distress. When it was his turn to address the court, Mohammed attempted a delicate balancing act. His behavior suggested remorse. He offered an apology, acknowledging that drugs and alcohol had influenced his actions. His attitude, at least on the surface, carried the language of regret, but the presiding judge was unconvinced, remarking that his apology lacked sincerity and depth. His mindset appeared focused not on full accountability, but on mitigation, an effort to lessen his responsibility by shifting blame to substance use, rather than owning the sustained abuse that had led to Javion's death. The defense had little ground to stand on. The evidence was overwhelming, the inconsistencies undeniable. Intoxication might explain poor decisions in a single moment, but it could not excuse a pattern of escalating violence carried out over days. During sentencing, the judge's words carried the weight of collective condemnation. He noted Mohammed's lack of genuine remorse, his failure to grasp the gravity of his actions, and the devastating consequences for Javion's short life. Then, he imposed the harshest sentence allowed under New Hampshire law, 45 years to life in prison, for second-degree murder. The decision made clear how seriously the justice system views crimes against children. And yet, even as justice was delivered in the legal sense, deeper questions remained. The trial illuminated the holes in the child welfare system that prison time alone could not repair. It revealed a young father who had needed support and guidance long before his failure as a caregiver turned into an act of violence. It exposed a community that, perhaps unknowingly, looked the other way until it was too late. Public reaction reflected that uneasy balance of grief, guilt, and determination. Media coverage focused less on sensational detail and more on what must change: better oversight of emergency custody transfers, mandatory welfare checks, stronger communication across agencies, and increased resources for families in crisis. One of the most urgent issues raised was the role of substance abuse in child abuse cases. Muhammad's own admission that alcohol had fueled his actions underscored the need for early screening and real support for caregivers struggling with addiction. Removing a child from one dangerous environment only to place them in another, equally unsafe, is no protection at all. The courtroom verdict closed one chapter, but the lessons it revealed demand that we write a different future for children like Javion. In the immediate wake of the tragedy, child welfare organizations began revising protocols for emergency custody placements. New Hampshire's DCYF added new screening requirements for caregivers, including mandatory parenting capacity assessments and substance abuse evaluations. They also introduced minimum contact standards for newly placed children, weekly in-person visits for the first month, followed by bi-weekly visits for the next 2 months, and monthly thereafter, with flexibility to increase oversight if risk factors were present. Schools also took lessons to heart. Districts across the state rolled out enhanced training on recognizing abuse indicators and responding to unexplained absences. Educators were reminded that instincts matter, that if something feels wrong, it must be reported. Better to err on the side of caution than to remain silent when a child's safety is in question. Community organizations launched awareness campaigns that avoided shock tactics and instead focused on practical, accessible knowledge: what to look for, how to report concerns, and why timely intervention matters. These efforts emphasize that proof is not required to raise a flag, that responsibility lies with investigators. What's needed from the public is vigilance and reasonable concern. The legal system also made changes. Prosecutors and law enforcement agencies re-examined their protocols for child death investigations, ensuring stronger interagency communication and more meticulous evidence collection. They recognize that holding abusers accountable requires not only courtroom skill, but also seamless collaboration across the protective network meant to safeguard children. Perhaps most importantly, the case sparked a conversation about supporting struggling parents before they reach a breaking point. Muhammad's escalation from harsh discipline to fatal violence did not happen overnight. Along the way were missed opportunities where intervention through parenting support, substance abuse treatment, mental health counseling, or financial aid might have altered the outcome. Recognizing those points of intervention is not about excusing his actions, but about preventing future tragedies. The role of poverty in these cases cannot be ignored. Economic stress does not justify abuse, but it increases the risk. Families facing unstable housing, food insecurity, or lack of affordable childcare live under constant pressure. And without adequate support, children bear the consequences. Addressing inequality and ensuring access to essential services is part of comprehensive child protection. Substance abuse treatment also emerged as a critical priority. Muhammad's own admission that alcohol shaped his actions reflects a common thread in child abuse cases. Expanding affordable treatment programs, reducing stigma around seeking help, and implementing regular screening for caregivers can prevent problems from escalating into violence. In the end, Javion's death became a catalyst. It pushed systems to strengthen oversight, communities to raise awareness, and policymakers to acknowledge that protecting children means more than reacting after tragedy. It means building safety nets strong enough to catch a child before they fall. Javian Riley was 7 years old. He loved Iron Man. He deserved to grow up, to go to school, to play with friends, to become whoever he was meant to be. That opportunity was stolen from him. But his story doesn't have to end with his death. It can continue through every child protected because someone learned to recognize the warning signs. Through every parent who gets help instead of becoming harmful. Through every system reformed to better protect the vulnerable. The lessons from this case are clear and actionable. Watch for children who suddenly disappear from regular activities. Notice unexplained injuries or behavioral changes. Trust your instincts when something seems wrong. Report concerns to authorities you don't need proof, just reasonable suspicion. Support programs that provide services to struggling families. Advocate for properly funded child protective services. Demand thorough background checks and ongoing monitoring for all caregivers. Be a voice for children, report concerns today. Call the National Child Abuse Hotline at 1-800-422-4453 if you suspect a child is being harmed. Support local organizations working to prevent child abuse. Share this story not for its shock value, but for its educational importance. Your awareness, your vigilance, your action could be the difference between a child suffering in silence and a child being saved. Remember Javian Riley not just as a victim, but as a teacher. His story illuminates the shadows where danger hides, shows us where our systems fail, and points the way toward better protection for all children. We cannot bring him back, but we can ensure his death was not in vain. Every child protected because of lessons learned from his case becomes part of his legacy, a legacy of awareness, action, and ultimately, hope. The responsibility for protecting children doesn't rest solely with parents or professionals, it rests with all of us. We are all part of the village that raises each child, and we all have a role in keeping them safe. Let Javon's story be the catalyst that transforms you from a bystander into a guardian. From someone who hopes children are safe into someone who actively ensures they are.